Anglican American. For me, a couple of things business-wise. This is the 50th anniversary of the original Wine of the Month Club. It's unbelievable that, I mean, how many companies do you even know that last 50 years, particularly one in an industry as volatile as wine, which is very hard to sustain. All the competitors I had when I started with my father in 1988 are gone. There's one left that started in 1990, but all the rest of them that predated that are gone. And there's a lot of new ones, and it certainly affects the way the way the business runs, the amount of competition. But I think because the founding principle, and I have to say this, and I'm going to bring this out soon. I went to see my father last Sunday, and I took my iPad and my microphones, and I didn't know what condition he was going to be in. He's 93. He's, his mind is pretty good. His body's a little frail. Doesn't do much, doesn't get out of the house much, but has wonderful caretakers. And so I thought, maybe he'll be in a position or a mood to talk to me about stuff. He always does. He always wants to know what we're doing and has questions about the Wine of the Month Club, but you never know. So I get there, he's asleep. It's like, 11 o'clock in the morning. I set up my little iPad and get ready to ask him some questions. And it hit me on the way down. I had nothing to present him, so I bought him a cake with the candles that say 5-0, and I stopped at Party City between Monrovia and San Diego and found the big helium balloons with the number 50, set them up in his room, got the place lit. And man, he sat down and started telling stories that I couldn't believe. I couldn't believe he remembered them. I mean, he told a couple of them 3 times, but that's okay. I'll edit those out. We'll hear each story once. But we were talking about how the club started, how the Wine of the Month Club idea came to him, how the wine shop in the first place was something he had no idea what he was doing. He had never merchandised wine before. He had never merchandised alcohol before. And when he bought this store in 1968 or 69, it was really like ice cream, booze, beer. It was not a wine shop. In fact, he tells the story on the little podcast we did that the wine section was 4 foot by 4 foot and only had, the basic stuff that you had to buy when you were. And the way it worked back then, and I remember this well, I worked in the store in the 70s as well, that the salesman would come in selling Jack Daniels or Jim Beam and say, oh, by the way, we just got the new Mondavi Cabernet in, so you got to put it on the shelf. And my dad was a pioneer in those days, because wine was not an important part of a shop like that, to say, no, I don't. I don't have to put it on the shelf. I have to taste it before it goes on the shelf, because nothing goes on my shelf without me tasting it first. So it was a hoot to hear the stories again. It was a hoot to get his mind working and to recall stuff. Went for about 29 minutes, and I'm sure he was exhausted. So that is coming out. And so to honor all that, you'll see this in your shipments starting next month, because May was the official month, and it's going to be a whole rest of the year worth of fun opportunities. We're going to make wines that we're buying just for the specials, more podcasting, more virtual tastings. And so there'll be a web page dedicated to all the specials that are associated with our 50th anniversary, which is incredible. For me, it's very exciting, actually, to tell you that story. Speaking of the podcast, you should be chiming in if you can. Had a great one this morning with Jamie Whetstone. These guys are coming out of the woodwork. We're doing a turn-away business on the podcast guests, and they're fabulous. And this guy had no idea of his pedigree in the wine world of California. But he knew the players. I mean, knew them physically. He knew the Mondavi. He knew Joe Heights. He knew the Mirsus. He knew these people because he was a waiter at a restaurant in Napa in the early days. And when I say early days, the earliest days are really the 60s and the 70s as far as wine becoming popular in California. But the Judgment of Paris was 1976, and even 10 to 15 years later, the impact of that was not known. It was not well established. It didn't create this huge spike in sales and everything went nuts. It took a little while for it to grow, and he was there. This guy heard it all and saw it all, and now he's making wine. He's making actually one of these he makes wine for himself out of Lodi, but he also makes low carb, low calorie things that are not de-alcoholized, just low alcohol. Very interesting wines, but a fabulous character. Point being, listen to the podcast. You're going to learn a ton. It's Wine Talks with Paul K. It's available wherever you want. And then a lot of these things are coming to YouTube too if you want to watch them. But that's not why I'm here today. We're talking about Pinot Noir. We selected 4 great Pinot Noirs. Pinot Noir, as you know, was the subject of the movie Sideways. Here it is. I think we talked about this a little bit, but this is the book. This Rex Pickett's been on the show. He's been on the podcast if you want to take a listen to that. But this book is so interesting because when I was reading it to do the podcast, I go, this isn't a book about, a fictional story. This is a story about a guy's life, and it's him. The first part of it anyway, where he was down and out writer, which he is, and it was hanging out in Santa Monica, couldn't afford to go to the tasting rooms during the day, so he'd wait till the end of the night when there's still a half bottle available. He'd go schmooze the bartender, the wine pourer, and he would hang out and drink Pinot Noir with the guys. And it became the love of his life as far as wine's concerned. And Pinot Noir changed, the consumption of Pinot Noir changed radically after the movie Sideways. As you probably all know, the consumption of Merlot plummeted, literally plummeted. And almost until now, it's taken that much time to recover. And the movie came out in 1988. I have to remember if he wrote the No Effing Merlot into the script or if that was done by the producer. But the point being that Pinot Noir was the subject of the show, and it was very difficult to get Pinot after the movie was over. When the movie became cultish, to find Pinot Noir in the price range we're talking about today was almost impossible because all of the grapes were being bought up by the big houses to make Pinot Noir and charge more money, and the lesser expensive Pinot Noirs weren't available. And that's changed now. We have plenty of Pinot Noirs to choose from, and they can be very expensive, and they can be very reasonable like these are, and these have all the character and the earmarks of great Pinot Noirs. So what is Pinot? It's the mother grape of Burgundy, France. And Burgundy, France being sort of northwest of Paris, northeast of Paris. It's a swath of land that goes north to south. It produces the most incredible wines. And as the Paul family puts it, he says, all wine enthusiasts end up in Burgundy. And so, in other words, as long as you're tasting wines and drinking wines and learning about wines, eventually you will land yourself in Burgundy trying to figure it out because it's so complicated and it's so interesting because it's so old. We're talking about the 9th century. We're talking about General Charlemagne, owning vineyards. We're talking about the church divvying up the vineyards into small hectares for the people. It's got such dramatic history. And it's probably one of the most exclusive areas in the world to be able to buy grapes and B, own property. I think I discussed this before. Even the famed family, the Paul Myers that I just spoke about earlier, were in escrow to buy, finally, some Burgundy land. And the government pulled some 12th century regulation out of the book and said, you can't do it. And so they weren't able to acquire it. And that they ended up in Sonoma at Seafair Vineyards making amazing Pinots as well. But so the Pinot Noir, and the reason this is important to understand is the Côte de Nuits, which is the furthest north large swath of appellation of Burgundy, is the most desired. And then there's the Côte de Beaune, which is sort of the center. And then there's the Chalonnaise, Côte de Chalonnaise, which is the lower half. And then there's the Mâconnais, which is even lower than that. And right below that's going to be Beaujolais and other appellations. And so what's so important about that? It's incredible because Pinot Noir is considered one of the most indicative grapes of where it's grown. In other words, it's so dramatically different from parcel to parcel, let alone country to country or region to region, just within the microclimate and the microregions or the microappellations of Burgundy, do they present incredibly different wines. And this is one of the fascinations. The problem with it is it's really expensive. I mean, if you want to study Burgundy, it's really expensive. The least expensive Burgundy I have in the warehouse here is $70 a bottle. That's the least expensive. We have them up to $7,000 a bottle. So you can imagine trying to figure that part of it out. And what's interesting about Burgundy mostly is most of the houses that make Pinot Noir, and it is the only grape you can grow there for red grapes, is that you have the same winemaker in many of these places, and they're getting small lots of grapes from various tiny vineyards, a hectare, which is 2.5 acres, or 2 hectares. These are tiny acreages, but they're making dramatically different wines than across the street, literally across the street, because there's such tectonic breakup over the millennial of the soil that if a root goes down 30 meters and touches some type of nutrient or soil, across the street, that same 30 meters is touching a completely different type of soil. And because Pinot Noir is such a great indicator of where it's grown, you get these dramatically different wines from the same winemaker, from the same wine facility, the only difference being the source of the grapes. And this is what's fascinating about Burgundy, about Pinot Noir. And Pinot Noir does the same thing all over the world. And that's what we're going to taste today. Whether it's a California one like the Silver Lining, or a Russian River like the Wooden Head, or like the Petaluma Gap like the Leghorn, you're going to taste something completely different. And the California Pinot Noirs, I think, rival the world. And I would say next to Burgundy, France, are probably the most important region of growing Pinot Noir is California, and particularly the Central Coast and up and down the coast, Santa Barbara, Santa Ynez. Not as much Sonoma and not as much Napa. Don't care for them personally, but not as important. Sonoma, yes. Sonoma is hugely important for Pinot Noir in California. And so we're going to start tasting them. If there's any questions, you can text, or you can unlock your mute if you like. That's fine. I don't care. We're going to taste the Silver Lining, which is a California appellated Pinot. I chose this for this virtual tasting because of it's very Pinot-ish. And so when we were talking about some of the stuff, we talk about the fact that if it's California, it can be anywhere from, Eureka to Calexico. And so how do you get a regional characteristic out of a grape with such a large swath of land? You can't really, but you can get Pinot Noir out of it. You can get the character of Pinot to talk about and to taste, and that's what the Silver Lining does. I think it's of the 4 of them, it's the lightest complected one, and it's the most. It's not the most, but it's very indicative of Pinot Noirs of character in the flavors. But you're not going to get terroir. You're not going to get the soil or the granite that might be blinded. So if we just pour that in a glass, just take a look at the color. Wonderful, beautiful sapphire. I mean, not sapphire, it's blue. Magenta color. And it doesn't change to the edges. You're not seeing the color change or the hue. If this wine was aging prematurely, we would see sort of a brick color, but we're not seeing that. We're seeing a wonderful, vibrant color. This is a 2019, so it's been in the bottle for a little bit. So let's take a swirl. And, we wrote about the people that make this. This is O'Neill Winery. It's a huge winery. They make a ton of wine. We've done a lot of business with them over the years. And they've always been very kind to us in order to purchase the wines and provide them. This wine being $9.99 is ridiculously inexpensive for Pinot Noir, for one that tastes like Pinot Noir, and which is one of the key things. Wonderful weight, not too heavy, not glycol at sort of oily character, and wonderful black fruit kind of through the middle, finishes hangs on for a little bit. Not the longest finish I've tasted in a wine, but what are you going to get from a California, appellated Pinot Noir? They wrote down here a little bit of vanilla. They talk about red licorice, which is kind of interesting. I have a comment here. Smells like a s'more. Wow, that's interesting. Let me smell that. Let me try that. I kind of get there's a little bit of chocolate, and there was that burnt. What do you call that? Burnt marshmallow. That's a good one. I have to start saying like s'mores. That's a contemporary word. I don't think my father or Michael Broadbent would have used that term. So, but that's okay. That's what we smell. Just solid. I'm gonna need something to pour my wine into. Is there a glass over there, Leslie? My production assistant's here, and we're talking about. I love it too. I think it's just for $9.99. Anything? A bucket? Is there a black bucket or anything? No, that's kind of gross. Maybe there's one over there. They used to have a spit bucket in here. This wine, a few more years, it's got a cork finish. It'll soften out a little bit over time, and it'll be fine. It's not gonna. It doesn't have a ton of acid to carry. Yeah, that's too small. They're bringing one in now. It's okay. It's okay. You can make noise. Come on in. Everybody's worried about making noise. It's live, man. We're live. Thank you. All right. So that's sort of the benchmark for California style Pinots. I don't taste them too frequently that have Pinot Noir character. One of the worst places for Pinot Noir up until recently was Chile and South America. Just tasted a Uruguayan Pinot Noir, and they're sort of where Chile was a few years ago in Argentina. Fine wines, well made, but you don't feel like you're drinking Pinot Noir. And Chile's the same way. In Chile, when the Chilean wines hit the U.S. market in the early '80s, Merlot was the favorite grape, and Sauvignon Blanc was the favorite grape of the Chilean whites. In Argentina, of course, it's Malbec and Torrontés. But man, there are some incredible Pinot Noirs from Patagonia, and these are structured, beautiful wines that have taken many, many harvests to understand and work the land and work how the grapes are grown, work the trellising, and get out of the wine, get out of the soil the grape you want. And there's some fabulous ones. Up until really recently, they tasted like red wine, and that's okay. If you like to taste it. Okay, the next one is my favorite new area for Pinot Noir in California, which is the Petaluma Gap. You're going to see a substantially lighter color, but I think you're going to find the complexity and the elegance of this wine, off the charts compared to its lesser expensive counterpart. Very few cases of this wine were produced. There's only 196. It's got a 91 from James Suckling. Leghorn, not to be confused with Foghorn Leghorn, the cartoon guy. I said, boy. I said, listen to me, boy. So, so this is the Petaluma Gap is a new appellation in California, newer. We've talked about this before, but getting an appellation in America is tough. It takes many years. You've got to prove many things, soil content, and the reason why the Petaluma Gap is different than any other place in Sonoma. But the one thing it is different, it runs east-west compared to the Sonoma Valley, which runs north-south generally. And so the Petaluma Gap brings in maritime fog and wind that comes across and connects to Sonoma and produces a completely different style wine. And the Pinots are very elegant, and they're very complex, and the colors are deceiving. You'll find that with this wine. So this is the Leghorn. I think what vintage is this? 2017. Again, only 200 cases were produced total. Oof, wow. Okay, that nose is phenomenal. Wow. And hello to Wisconsin. You should be having some cheese with this, maybe? I think a soft cheese would be good with the Pinot Noir. So, do you get the complexity in here? The nuances, the little bit of oak, the little bit of dark cherry, the little bit of dark fruit, and the nose is just gorgeous. I kind of want to had to just sit there so my taste buds get it all. You know, the tongue, there's controversy over whether the tongue senses all of the flavors, the bitterness, the sugar, and the acid across all the taste buds, or whether or not it's segmented. If you Google sensors of the tongue, you're going to get a chart that shows bitter on the sides, I think sweet in the front, and acid in the back. I forgot exactly where it was, but and kind of the middle doesn't do anything, according to some contemporary thought processes. But then there's others that are disputing that and saying that no, your tongue can sense everything everywhere. But I kind of agree with the original theory, because you can taste it as it kind of washes through your tongue, and as you swallow, you do taste different things, different impressions conjure up thoughts, and that's what we want. Wow. Okay. In Wisconsin, they're having white cheddar with sriracha, 5-year aged. That is with sriracha. That's interesting. Don't we get some kind of, you know, chili based products in wine typically have a hard time unless it's like Gewürztraminer or Riesling or something. I'd be interested to try that. Certainly the white cheddar would work, but that's I don't know, man. In Wisconsin, they allow you to put sriracha in cheese. It seems like it would be sacrilege or something. Maybe, I don't know. That's a California. Actually, was it Vietnamese? I think sriracha. You know, I love the hint of oak, and this is really great too. There's a spice component that I'm getting. All right. All right, so I chose this next one, the Wooden Head, perhaps next to the Petaluma Gap, for what I consider elegant, structured Pinot Noir in California. The next one is probably my favorite appellation across all California is the Russian River for Pinot Noir. It's taken me a little while to come to that conclusion over the years of tasting all these things, but they tend to be a little meatier. They tend to have just a little bit more depth and complexity. And so that's why I use the term elegant for the Petaluma Gap, because they are more feminine. The Russian River tends to produce more robust things. Here, the color of this one is obviously darker than the one we just poured. This one happens to be 2017. It's unfiltered, unfined. So that would actually tell you that it's probably vegan as well. And because vegan, there's nothing then that would be an animal product to do anything with, because typically, or wines can be fined. Fining is different than filtering. Filtering would be, during the bottling line, you could run through a filter. It could be, a regular filter you'd think you'd use in a kitchen, like a cheesecloth thing, more sophisticated, of course, or even a diatomaceous earth filter like a pool. But this is unfiltered, so during the line of bottling, nothing happens. And then prior to that, you can fine the wine, which is sort of like filtering, and that is you put a substance in the barrel, and it will attract the solids in the wine and leave you on the top the clear wine. And that is often egg whites. So from a vegan standpoint, you can't do that. And so they have non-animal fining agents that you can use. but they also use egg whites and seashell. So, you know, when somebody says the wine's vegan, that's the only thing that they could be talking about. Though I did hear recently, which I just like that, okay, really, that, when the vines are picked, there's grapes, there's all kinds of stuff. There could be lizards in this cluster. You don't know. And so there's clearly bugs and all kinds of, animal. I suppose an insect is an animal that gets crushed into it. I know it sounds kind of weird, but that's true. Not the least of which there was a Chardonnay that came through here not too long ago. We found a spider in it. That wasn't vegan. So I don't know if there's a true vegan wine, really, but at least from the manufacturing standpoint, not using egg whites or shellfish or shells would be considered vegan. The other thing that they try to talk about is what's the word? Gluten-free. And you're like, what do you mean? Like, how can a wine have gluten in it? Well, there is a point during the process of aging a wine that, gluten could be introduced into the wine, and that is they use a wheat paste sometimes to seal a barrel stave, or not the stave, but actually the rim. And so they've gone away from a wheat paste in case the gluten-free folks, can sense gluten in the wine. Not likely, but whatever. Anyway, all right, so the Russian River. This is an interesting wine because it was made by a guy that kind of started making wine in his garage. And the Russian River is the upper north part of the Sonoma Valley. Sonoma Valley is huge compared to Napa. It's, 30 miles long or something. It's very big and very wide, and it has a lot of different appellations that can to make different wines. The Alexander Valley, makes Pinot, but not, they're okay. Alexander Valley, which is a huge part of the central Sonoma, is more about Bordeaux varietals, Malbecs, and things like that, or Cabernets. But the Russian River is known for its Chardonnay and its Pinot Noir. So here is the Pinot from the Wooden Head. And is that nose completely different? Is that what we were talking about? Like the elegance of the Leghorn versus the brashness of this nose in this thing? This is like jumps out of the glass. Love it. Now, in the old days, there you go. See, we're hearing from the folks in Wisconsin that they've never heard of vegan wine. There's a funny story. There's a podcast I did. If you get on YouTube on our Wine of the Month Club channel, there is a interview with John Sally, the famed NBA player, the only guy that has 4 NBA championship rings. He played for the Lakers for a while, and he was selling a vegan wine. It was made by Claude Lachance in Gilroy, California. And so it's a very funny interview because he's a funny guy. But he says, I'm having trouble selling this in the steakhouses. Shocker. Because why would you sell a vegan wine in a steakhouse? So he put his thumb over the name vegan as he pours it for any potential steakhouse buyer. So here, he has to deliberately make sure his thumb covers the word vegan as he's pouring these very robust, beautiful wines that they made at Claude Lachance for the vegan wine company. But I'm not sure why you would go to a steakhouse to try and sell a vegan wine, but he did. It's a very funny episode if you want to check it out. I think the sound bite's on the podcast channel as well. So anyway, here's this Russian River big wine. It's all in the nose, man. You can't wait to taste this because of what the nose is telling you. Mm. So you can see that of the 3 so far, this is the most robust. And wow, the finish is still hanging around. I can really still taste this wonderful strawberry character, which is strawberry is probably the primary descriptor of Pinot. It's often used. It's like the basis of Pinot Noir, sort of. But this one, man, it's got a lot going on. And the finish, I still taste the wine. So that's a long finish. That's what we call a long finish. It's okay. You can still eat meat, even though the wine's vegan. It doesn't- I can imagine Wisconsin is an important place for meat in America, so I don't think you'd worry about it. It's funny, Pinot's not necessarily known to go, with the heavier cuts of meat. Like it's not a game type wine, but it is certainly a pork reduction kind of wine. You can eat it with pork. You can probably have it with a Argentinian steak, maybe that's not so charred out. But you stay away from heavier cuts. You don't have boar with it. You don't have game meat with it. You stay with lighter things, and you can have really good with salmon. Probably the best salmon I've ever had was in Oregon at the Oregon Pinot Noir Festival, no less, 1989, and it just fabulous salmon with these fabulous Pinot Noirs from Oregon, which is a point I was going to make earlier. When I started doing this in the 80s and prior with my dad, we always tried to compare Pinot Noir from California to Burgundy. And you would always hear at tastings, well, it's very Burgundian. Yeah, it's very Burgundian. Yeah. Oh, this is Burgundian. It's like, it's not. It isn't Burgundy. We're not in this weird tectonic shifting appellation of the world that makes the most elegant wines of the grape that you can that you can taste all this wonderful character. We're not there. We're in California, and we have different things to taste, and we have different things to play with, and different flavors to find. And so it was this, but everyone wanted to compare themselves to Burgundy because that's what it was. It's just like saying a Napa cab is very Bordeaux-esque. We don't say that. We never really did. Maybe we did earlier before my time, but Burgundian, the character of Burgundy was often trying to be duplicated in California, and it's not. You can't do that. And that's what, in fact, the winemaker I did today, the podcast, his own wine is called Time Place. Not to be confused with time and place, but the idea is wine represents a time, the vintage, and a place where it's grown. And that's what's supposed to emote. That's where you're supposed to get the feelings that you have with a good glass of wine is from those two principles. And that's why Burgundy should not be compared to California and vice versa. You should compare Burgundy at Munch Burgundy and California Munch California, and that's what we're doing here. I think you can see a substantial difference between these three wines, and it's same grape. It's just where it's grown and who made it. But so far, I'm having the most fun with this one. Wowie. Since we're on the subject of Pinot Noir, of the we talked about this before, but these are the ailments of a human body. A book called "Wine is the Best Medicine," and it was written by a French doctor in the '70s and translated to English and sold over here. And we happened to find a copy in my dad's library of books, and maybe because he was a pharmacist who specialized in plant medicine, was interested in this. But one of these ailments can be helped by a French Pinot Noir. It could be nervous depression, it could be rheumatism, or it could be weight loss. If you guessed, wait a minute, depression was one guess here. Oh, I'm sorry. It is weight loss. And the recommended dose for a Côte de Beaune, which is the center part of Burgundy, France, is 4 glasses a day. So whether you want to lose weight or not, I think it's a good dosage. So that's okay. Anyway, great wine. All right, last on the list today is I don't know how to say this, Fauvist. So the reason I chose this one is because it sort of brings out Santa Barbara as one of the great regions. And we were up not too long ago in Los Olivos, Santa Barbara. We were staying in Santa Barbara. We had some friends, and we were cruising around, and we went to Beckman, and we went to all these wineries. We went to Dragonet and Los Olivos, which is a really cute town if you haven't been there. And finally, after about the third or fourth winery, our friends go, "When are we going to get a Cabernet?" And I'm like, "It ain't happening. Maybe by the time I get the Babcock Vineyards, good friend Brian Babcock, he makes Cabernets and things like that. But you're not going to get it in Santa Barbara, really. It's only until recently, in the last few years, did they understand how to grow grapes like Cabernet and Malbec in the Santa Barbara Hills. So they've always made Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. That's those Dick Sanford, who made Santa Barbara famous with his Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. That's what you make. And so I chose that because of this, because Santa Barbara is so important. The other reason, this wine is also, I think it is organic. So I wanted to show one of those. And I'm right, it's organic. It's biodynamic as well. So what's biodynamic? We talked about this on the organic series that we did. But biodynamic takes the organic methodologies, which is the no pesticides and no sulfur additions, and depending on what country you're in, there's a little bit of organic flexibility there. But biodynamic also includes planting by the moon, the cycle of the moon, picking by the cycle of the moon. You consider that. How you orientate the bottles in the cellar when they're aging, how the barrels are, all these little sort of pieces that are explained in this book called Agriculture by Rudolf Steiner, the authority in the 20s. Actually, this book was written regarding biodynamic farming. And is it hocus pocus? I don't think so. I think you can taste it, and I think you can understand it, and I think that the idea, which is the most important comment I've ever heard, and that is, if the moon's gravitational pull can move oceans, and your body in a grape is 90% water, it's doing something. Something's happening from that, and so I think it can be reflected in a glass of wine. So this is a biodynamic, Santa Barbara-based Pinot Noir. And so it should be substantially different when you taste it. And so you get a little toast in that nose. I'm not going to call it s'mores, but I got an interesting toast. Mm. Mm-hmm. Wow. So completely different, right? The guys that make this wine, one of them was a nurseryman. He's a partner in this, and he's a nurseryman, he's on the podcast too. Andrew, forgot his last name. I had never had a conversation with a guy that actually sells the grape rootstock and sells the grapevines themselves, and how he goes out to the vineyard, and you and I want to start a vineyard tomorrow in Santa Barbara, and he says, "Oh, let's take a look at the soil." He digs a hole. He asks you what you want to plant. You're going to grow Syrah, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Cabernet. What do you want to grow? And then he makes the recommendations on the rootstock, and he makes this recommendation on the clone of the varietal you want to grow. And it was a fabulous conversation, because I'd never had a chance to speak with somebody that has to help make that decision. Kind of goes back to this idea, well, I want to be in the wine business. I'm going to start a winery. I'm going to own a vineyard. I'm going to buy a piece of land. And it's like, yeah, but you don't just do that. You can buy a piece of land all you want, but you don't just plant whatever you feel like, because it doesn't always work. And here's a guy that witnessed it working and not working and telling you how to do it. So this is made by him and his friend. They probably should have the head examined once they were making money selling vines. Now they're trying to make money selling wine, which is tough to do. But notice how different the structure is. So there's a question here. Certainly the smoke is in there. Wild mushrooms. Mushroom's a tough one on most. Like Petaluma Gap, often people use the term mushroom. I have a hard time sensing that as well. So you're not alone in that. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that you just don't sense it. You may sense other things that people don't sense. But I'm not sure I would know the difference between a wild mushroom, because I don't pick a wild mushroom thinking I might die from it, versus a hothouse mushroom. I don't know the difference. How am I supposed to know the difference? There is a difference between like shiitake mushrooms and brown mushrooms and white mushrooms. That makes sense. But wild versus grown in a hothouse. I don't know the difference. And I cook a lot. Wow. I just got a comment saying this is our favorite one, and I kind of have to agree with the idea from the structure and the flavor profile and the overall impression. This is a complete and complex Santa Barbara-based Pinot Noir. A little bit different than the old school ones. The 70s Pinots and the 80s Pinots were fruitier and strawberry driven. This one's not. And that certainly could come from the biodynamic farming and processing of the grapes. By the way, you need to understand when you buy a wine, you see a wine that says organic grapes versus certified organic. Okay, two different things. Wine can be made from the vineyard can be organic. You can farm organically and plant the grapes and cultivate them and farm them organically. But once you bring them into the winery, all bets could be off on the organic part. So those wines will say made with organic grapes. They will not have the certification of organic on the back. And by the way, there are a lot of wines that are organic that are absolutely to the T farmed. So on the opposite side, farmed organically and processed organically that don't want to bother with the certification. They only do it because they want to do it anyway. And the certification takes inspectors and every 3 years and all this headaches and money when they're just trying to make good wine. And the way they want to make good wine is organic. So you can't always be certain that a wine that's you're drinking is not organic. I taste many wines that are organic that are told to me later, oh, this is organic, the way it's processed. And because it's not certified does not mean it's not organic. So all that's kind of convoluted, but it really comes down to what's in the glass and do you want to drink it, right? So I have a question about whether organic's more expensive. It is more expensive to make organic wines because it takes more attention in the vineyard. It doesn't mean that they're all more expensive. I taste many good valued organic wines because of the way they, maybe they own the land longer than the previous person, or they bought the land in the 70s and they don't have any expense. But it does seem to be that way with vegetables at the market. But you'll also recognize that when you go to the market and you buy the organic carrots, they're not necessarily taste any better. In fact, sometimes they taste worse. Sometimes they're more bitter. So it's not a guarantee of a taste profile or quality. It still comes down to the passion of the winemaker or the farmer to make sure that they get the best grapes they can make from where they're at, and then make good wine from that as a point. So the old adage that you can make good wine, you can't make good wine from bad grapes. That is firm, but you can make bad wine from good grapes, and I taste them every Tuesday. So with that, cheers. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed it. Join us next in 2 weeks for our Chardonnay examples. Cheers.